Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's lecture on Latinx art and literature. When discussing Latinx literature, the reading talks about how it serves as a tool of empowerment for Latinx readers, creates stories that represent the Latinx community. It serves as a space in which to uphold language and culture, and provides a window into Latinx experiences for non-Latinx readers. The reading talked about Latinx poetry, particularly connected to two movements of the 1960s and the 1970s, and two major poems that came out of that time period and that have become classics of Latinx literature are Corky Gonzalez's I Am Joaquin and Pedro Pietri's Puerto Rican Obituary. The reading talks about how Latinx poetry is connected to the oral traditions of Latinx cultures. It displays innovative uses of multiple languages represented within Latinx communities. And it discusses contemporary forms of poetry, such as slam poetry, and in spaces such as the New York Poets Cafe, which still exists today. In discussing Corky Gonzalez's poem, I Am Joaquin, the reading talks about how it's representative of the Chicano movement literature that came out during this time. And the themes of this type of poetry includes identifying Chicanos with Mexico and indigenous roots, a focus on urban working class life in the barrio, how family represents cultural and communal strength, a sense of carnalismo or brotherhood among Chicanos, and representations of political action. So a lot of the poetry that we find during this time period has these various themes and elements to it. The reading also talked about the role of theater during the movement, and one prominent theater group that came out was Luis Valdez's El Teatro Campesino, which was attached to the United Farm Workers Union and was used as a tool to educate and politicize farm workers. In the 1970s, the group created plays focusing on Chicanos in the Vietnam War, and famously created the play Zoot Suit, which later on became a film. Contemporary theater groups that the reading talked about include Latins Anonymous and Culture Clash. The reading also talked about Chicano popular fiction and discusses quite a number of different authors, gives you different sort of examples of genres and so on. Here I'm just highlighting a few of the ones discussed in the chapter. Examples of popularly known writers and their works are Tomás Rivera's Y no se lo trago a la tierra and The Earth Did Not Part, Rudolfo Anaya's Bless Me Ultima, Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street, which many of you might be familiar with since many high school literature classes also used this novel, and Denise Chavez's Last of the Menu Girls. One of the genres the reading talks about that is popular within fiction are mystery novels. Some of these popular authors are Lucha Corpi, Rolando Hinojosa, and Manuel Ramos. The reading also talks about more contemporary forms of fiction and how this now includes graphic novels and comic books, which have become increasingly popular in a new genre for Latinx writers. One of these that the reading talks about is depicted here in the image called Love and Rockets. The reading focuses on Chicano literature, so I wanted to also share popular fiction by non-Chicanx writers. Of course, this is just a very short selection. There are many more here, but just to give you a sense that Latinx literature in general is a very broad field of art, and that there have been numerous writers, including more recent ones. So a selection of these includes Esmeralda Santiago, who's a Puerto Rican writer, of her memoir, When I Was Puerto Rican. More recently, Xochitl Gonzalez, who's also Puerto Rican, published her novel, Olga Dies Dreaming. Ernesto Quiñones, who's Puerto Rican and Ecuadorian, published in 2000 his first book called Bodega Dreams. He's also published other novels since then. Very well-known Dominican writer Julia Alvarez wrote her first novel in 1991 called How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents. Juno Diaz, who's also Dominican, wrote his most recent novel, The Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and won a Pulitzer Prize for his novel. Cristina Garcia is a Cuban-American author, and her first novel was called Dreaming in Cuban in 1992. And the sequel to that novel is actually coming out this year. So this is just a brief sampling of the many different kinds of Latinx authors of literature that there are. And you can look up any of these names and find other novels and short stories and so on that they've written as well. Now, the other chapter for this week also talks about various Chicano art forms, beginning with religious art, which includes carving santos, yard altars, and cemetery arts. And this is just one example of the kind of wood carvings that the reading talked about. There are also secular popular artists that the reading discussed. These include Judith Baca, Carmen Lomas Garza, and Yolanda Lopez. And the reading talked about Yolanda Lopez's series of reimagining the representations of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And this is one of her pieces, where in this series, she's trying to create images of the Virgen de Guadalupe that are more relatable and representative of everyday women. Here we have a woman who is sewing. The reading also talked about muralism and graffiti art. Muralism consists of a popular art form created in public spaces, often with the collaboration of members of a community. And the reading gave a number of examples of how some mural artists engage in different communities, members of different neighborhoods in the Southwest, in the creation of the murals that they create in different spaces, public spaces. This kind of art is derived from Mexican artists such as Diego Rivera, who popularized the form in Mexico. And graffiti art has also been incorporated into this kind of art, which originally was gang-related, but became combined with the muralist art movement. The reading also talks about lowriders as arts, and this is, an example of the definitions we talked about last time about mass culture or popular culture types of art, where in this case, people are taking cars and bicycles or sort of everyday things that people use and adorning them and using art to create a unique Chicano aesthetic. And this is just one image. If you look around, there are usually different like car fairs or festivals that take place around the Denver area, but also in other major cities. And it's basically a space for people from the community to bring in their lowriders and display them. So it's kind of a communal public art display when you see some of these events being publicized. So this gives you an example or sampling of the kinds of literature and art that are created by Chicanx and other Latinx artists. This ends our lecture for this week, and I look forward to your comments in the discussion posts. Have a good week.